Good morning, fellow humans, and we're welcome to another installment of the most delightful podcast in the world. Before I forget, I keep on forgetting, but I'm going to tell you now. See, look at the bottom of your screen. There is a thing that says subscribe. Hit it, hit it, hit it. Even if you've subscribed before this, hit it again in case, because that way you'll be told when Pat and I, the minute Pat and I come on or we put this up, you'll be told. So you'll never miss a single episode, and you won't be saying, "Oh my God, my life is wrecked. I missed one of Pat and Jude's chats." So, is that good advice, Pat?
No, that was very good. Very
Uh,
impressive.
couldn't be better. Couldn't be better. Anyway,
Paul with the best of them.
how's the world there and how's the weather?
Judy, that there's definitely a change. Donegal is a bit dark and damp today. And Jesus, Jude, I keep saying, as I was saying to my dear missus, in years gone past, we get about 3 weeks around in May, and
Yeah.
that's usually our summer. I'm starting to wonder, is that going to be our summer?
Well,
So,
I was
listen,
thinking
I
that
think it was,
yesterday too. I was thinking the same thing.
it's been. Uh, remember just to be in Derry, the annual holidays were the first 2 weeks in August, and then it became the last week in July and the first week, and they were taking it back a bit. Now that I think they nearly take it back to May because during this last 4 or 5 years, May has been has been remarkably good, and then you need a boat in August because it just rains all the time. The
Uh,
roads
uh,
are permanently wet.
yeah, dreary, dreary, dreary. My missus said yesterday, as the sun shone through the sky, she says, "Oh, this weather's too good. The crops needs, the growth needs rain." I think that's
Well,
right.
but I think they're saying this week's going to improve again. I
Oh, I
think it
hope
was
so.
Barabest I heard about the other day saying
Uh,
that there's high pressure coming in again. So I'll be
so
right.
am I to take it from that, Pat, that you watch the Occupied Territories TV channel rather than the Free Ireland 26 counties
Yeah,
channel?
around here, Jude, most of the we're Donegal is the rarest place, Jude. Talk about a Cinderella county. It's neither of the north nor of the south. In the sense that we get a lot of stuff from the north, and we get. Jude, if I went down to the bottom of my road, which is literally 3 minutes away, from where I'm sitting now, every second car will have a northern registration, and that's
Mhm.
not an exaggeration. Half them from Derry and whatever. And it's just it just shows you the artificiality of the border.
Oh, I mean, it's unbelievable. It flies in the face of reason when you put it like that. And you
Yeah.
see, and so many, when I was at school, practically everybody's granny, if they were dairy people, practically everyone's granny was from Donegal.
Absolutely. Jude, when I went into Derry first, like I came down from Dublin and I went into Derry, and every second person told me, "Oh, my granny was McLaughlin from Clarendon or Buncrana or whatever."
Yeah.
What he called me, my dad came from, on a showing somewhere, and Jesus, dude, sure half the bogs had, I think the people there, nearly 80% of them had um, people like we're looking at Martin McGuinness. His mother was definitely from Donegal. Jim Sharkey, Ambassador Jim, his mother was from Donegal. He could keep on going.
Hmm.
So there
But
you go.
given the fact that there is this border pat at present, it doesn't really interfere with your life. Maybe we're making too much fuss over it, are we? You can cross the border and back
No,
again.
Jude, it did make a big difference. The way things when you're young stick in your mind. I remember I was a wee fellow living in Letterkenny, and I remember there's a guy called Jack Harris. Jack says, "Hey, Pat," I was about 10 or 11, and Jack was, what he's saying, "Come on, I'm collecting my sister, and really, come on, you boys, if you want a bit of crack, get out." And we used to go into Derry and collect his sister at the railway station. But on the way in, his car was bonded, you know. And then he had on the way out, it was unbonded or whatever the hell all that, like, and it was a big difference. And then remember the customs, Jude, and so on. And
There
there
was
was
a
all sorts. And
triptych. There was a triptych, wasn't there a triptych thing?
what
I
was
have a
that?
memory of a document that had three parts to it for going across the
Three parts to it. Yeah. And so, but I remember too, Jude. I remember I worked and when I was about 15 or 16. I worked in a bar in Letterkenny, and on a Sunday evening, 90% of the customers were from Derry because there was no bars open in Derry on a Sunday evening. You know, Derry and Mass used to come, and Strabane used to come out to Donegal because all the pubs were shut in the north because of the old, you know,
Yeah,
Presbyterian or
yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so there was two very distinct lifestyles. You
Aye.
know, and I remember there was a big row one time. There was an athletics meeting held in Derry, and the RUC stopped it. No way, Jude. There was a team from Cavan, and apparently the vests were with stripes, green, white, and gold. Even though the people running were 10-year-olds. Yeah.
Uh,
So like, and the swings up at Brook Park
aye.
were actually locked on a Sunday, so people couldn't play in them. Children couldn't play in them.
Dear
Like
God.
you tell me that there was no different. And down the south then they were playing football, soccer, Gaelic, and anything you can think of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ridiculous. But I do remember that time when people crossed the border to do the drinking. And when I lived in Muff or Escaheen to be exact,
Squilling
uh,
pig.
the squeal. How did you remember that? The squealing pig. What a great
Uh,
name for a pub. What a great name for a pub. Is that still going?
aye, still going.
We'll have to ask them for 10%, given that we've given them a puff. But it was a great name. Absolutely wonderful. And
Absolutely.
so many people would pile down there and they would all know each other, even though they come
Yeah.
separately. Anyway, enough of that nostalgia. More pressing matters, Pat, and you drew my attention to it today. More deaths in Donegal. And now everywhere gets a share
Aye,
of death, but when deaths
aye.
come suddenly and to youthful people, it's horrible. Tell me about this.
On Saturday, I was taking the dog for a walk just up the road, and my son, second son, was walking. And he said, "Dad, that's two sirens." And you knew by the what would you say, the noise, that there was something serious on,
Hmm.
because they were loud and they were sort of going at a hell of a rate. So and I said, "Oh God, there's something going on there." And Jude, little did I know, two young fellas, and I wrote down their names because one was Matt Sabanda, and he was 18, and he was at Cranach College, where my son had been a teacher. He's not there anymore. And Emmanuel Famola, he was 16, and he went to Scolwara, where my sons went to school. So I know these places pretty well. And so these two young fellas, there was three of them. I don't know the name of the other young guy. He managed to get to shore, but apparently there's a place called Ned's Point, and it's a lovely place. And the sun was shining, and they were playing football. The ball went into the water. The boys jumped on. There's a bit of crack, whatever. But apparently, from what I can gather, there was a bit of a current, and they weren't great swimmers. And what they thought was relatively, or so it seems, relatively, they thought it was relatively shallow, was not relatively shallow. So anyway, two of them are now dead. Jude, it's terrible. Here's the thing too. There was a vigil yesterday down at the St Mary's Oratory in Buncrana, and it was lovely to see. Jude, it was bunged. I mean, they couldn't get into the church, and there was a huge crowd standing outside. And it was lovely to see the community come together to
Mhm.
show such respect and love and whatever other, and sorrow for the passing of these two young fellas. And
Mhm.
I think it sent out the right message that, as the parish priest, Father Bradley, said, these people were not immigrants; they were new parishioners. And I thought it was a nice way of putting it.
Mm, mm. Well, I've always been struck by that in rural communities, whether Tyrone or Derry or Donegal, that the whole community rallies around when someone local dies, and especially as you say, this sort of tragic thing where two young fellas really died. It's very impressive,
Mm.
and they support one another, and I think it must give some degree of consolation to those loved ones that are left behind. Um, but I think there's a bigger problem behind this, Pat. When I was a kid, my father used to say, "You say everybody should be able to swim." Mind you, he couldn't
Yeah,
swim. He couldn't swim, and he never had no intention of learning to swim. But as that is a fact, everybody should be taught to swim. It's so obvious.
yeah,
We say things like, "What is a good idea to have algebra on the curriculum, or is it a good idea to have, British history on the curriculum? Is it a good idea to have Greek on the curriculum?" But there's some things that stand out, and that one of them is life skills. And one of the life skills you
yeah,
need is
absolutely,
a
Jude.
life-saving skills, just simply to be
Yeah,
able to stay up. And you see, I'm sure those guys went into that, as you say, and everything looked fine. It was a nice day and the sun was shining, and I'm sure the water wasn't very rough because there was little wind about yesterday.
yeah.
And they're dead, and that's
They're
simply
dead.
because they couldn't
I did.
swim.
I don't. One was from I think Nigeria, and I'm not. I think the other one might have been Angola. I'm not 100% certain. But God knows what they left behind to get here and whatever. And they were living in that APS, the International Protection thing. It's I'm not sure it's that bad, but it's certainly not a home, and it's certainly you don't have your home comforts and all the rest of it.
Mm.
But anyway, that apparently they were two very nice young fellows. The school said they were very respectful and good students, and doing very well and all the rest of it. And you sort of go, God Almighty, it's a sort of tragedy. God help their families. Jude, I don't even know what religion they are. Like they were going to sort of Catholic schools, but that's about the height of it, you know.
But it
And
wouldn't
so on.
matter
But
what religion they are, Pat. The pain's just the
no,
same.
but what I'm saying, like I don't even know what sort of services are
Oh
available for
yeah,
them or
yeah,
what.
yeah.
Yeah, but I know the community down there will look after them and embrace their families.
The terrible thing with that kind of loss is not just the intensity at the time for their loved ones that are left behind, but that will travel on for at least another generation, two generations, maybe three generations. And people look back and
Yeah,
say, remember those two young fellas? He would have been your, granduncle or whatever. It never stops. It never
yeah.
stops, and it's so
You, you know,
preventable, so
Yeah,
preventable.
see the Swilly, Jude. There've been some terrible tragedies on the
Oh
Swilly.
yeah,
Remember, a family from Derry all drowned, a couple of years back. In fact, my oldest son was coming back. Was a teacher, and I think he was away on a school trip with kids, and they were coming back, and I had to collect them in Buncrana. And I remember that day, all I could hear was ambulance sirens and police sirens. And I said to Shane, what's going on? And all the rest. And then the next morning, I hear there was five people dead, a whole family. Basically, I think the only one was saved was a child. Somebody swam out and got the child. But that's a few years back. I remember even Phil Coulter's sister and his brother were killed on the Swilly.
that's right.
I'm
But
sorry, they weren't killed.
separate incidents, wasn't it?
Yeah, separate incidents. No, Jude, and and there've been numerous, not numerous, but a lot. The Swilly is a place of great tragedy.
Uh, uh, and it's beautiful too at the same time. But
It's called the Lake of Shadows, and it
yeah,
is, on the
yeah,
summer's
yeah,
day, you can see the shadows and all.
yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But
Well, I'm
there's
sure.
tragedy there as well.
Yeah, I'm sure what you're saying would apply to any number of. If you go around the coast of Ireland, you would find
Yeah.
similar things. Beautiful little
Mhm.
bays, and then attached to it the tragedy and the
But
loss.
the other thing as well, like last night too, that Garda in Dublin,
Ah,
Kevin
yes,
Flatley, he's what 49, and apparently he's two young kids at primary school age and so on. And he was out doing his duty yesterday, and you know, he was
but
killed.
I see. I said with regard to the two swimmers, the poor young fellows that died, that everybody should be taught to swim. Full stop.
Yeah.
And so they should just simply teach people to swim, basic swimming. Not everybody's going to be a champion swimmer, but that would certainly cut down on the number of fatalities that occur. Now, this Garda was on duty to check speeding, and
Yeah.
he was hit by this big motorbike. Now,
Uh,
the Taoiseach and all the rest chimed in and said, well, he was a wonderful man and he was doing his duty and so on. I'm sure that was true. But the thought crossed me, why was he killed? Like, if I'm checking the speed of cars and motorbikes going past, do I have to be standing in the middle of the road or whatever? I just,
I can't answer it. In fact, I think a lot of people are asking the same question. How and under God, and God bless him and his family, and his parents are still alive,
yeah.
and so on. Did he step out or what happened?
Well,
Like good God. As Drew Harris last night said, there seems to be some sort of concern about this thing. They're looking for footage and
yeah.
footage,
Uh,
camera footage, and all the rest of it. Dude, 1,000 cc bike is a huge bike. It's like one of those ones that you see on the big Grand Prix. Like, dude,
yeah.
like a 250 bike is quite so. Like this bike could probably do about 300 miles an hour, if you know what I mean. A
Mm.
1,000 cc. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. How come he was killed? Was he expected to stand out and try and stop somebody? Well, I don't know, Jude.
Well,
And I
it
think
could.
there's all sorts of a lot of sort of confusion about what happened.
But I would work on the assumption, as I say, the image that comes to my mind is of a policeman standing with his hand up like that, and people stop and he asks them questions.
Yeah, I think
I would say,
you know,
I
now,
would say
Jude,
in reflection, that simply shouldn't be a case, especially if it's speeding they're calling people up for. Because there are people who, when they speed, they will very often be young, and they'll very often say, "Ah, this guy's not stopping me," and they'll go speeding on.
yeah,
Uh, I think it's a very simple, basic equation.
yeah,
Let the stoppage system be such as, I don't know, a barrier of some kind which is portable, and have the cop stand at the side so that the chances of him getting hit.
uh,
I mean, that should be a no-brainer, I think. I really do.
aye,
And it's all very well saying he was
well,
doing his duty, but he was
the thing is,
probably
we're speculating, but we're speculating. We don't know. But
no.
there's something went seriously wrong. But no, Jude, I have to agree with you. What you're after saying, that scenario, I think must have happened, but I don't know.
We don't know, but I mean, if even it didn't, I'm saying it's obviously somewhere. It's a kind of situation where that sort of fatality
The
is
cop
likely to
should not,
happen.
that young Garda or that Garda should never been in that situation.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, all this stuff of people saying they're very sorry for him and doing his duty and all that, that's fine. I'm sure the family appreciate it. But they'd be far better having thought ahead. It's not as if this was the first guard that ever checked people speeding.
Yeah,
This has happened. In fact, I can think of a couple of cases where police try to stop or guards try to stop various people in cars, either joyriding or whatever, and they really have been either seriously injured or in some cases killed.
aye. Well, Harris said last night he wanted a full reset and rethink about road safety. He said about excessive speed, drink driving, and he says distraction. Dude, I was in Buncrana the other day. I was leaving the young middle son down, and now this is true. The sun was shining. And this guy went past, and I don't remember now whether it was a BMW but it was one of those big luxury cars.
Hmm.
And it was what do you call them, a cabriolet, open top.
Oh yeah,
And he
yeah.
was on his phone, literally on his phone, going through the town, talking about arrogance. And the
Hmm.
other one, Jude, there was about a couple of weeks ago, my dear missus was on, and there was a guy that's around about 5 minutes from here, and there was a guy on a huge big lorry, and he was on the phone, and I think he was trying to text as well. Jude, what sort of madness is that? Driving a 30-ton or 40-ton lorry, wherever
Hmm.
the hell it is, and
Hmm.
trying to text. Dude,
Well, here's
and by the way,
something.
he definitely was. I'm not making that up. He definitely was
Oh,
doing something with the phone that looked like texting.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'd be all in favor of the very strong line taken with that. But my mind goes back to Gay Byrne. And when Gay Byrne
Hmm.
left RTE, as I recall it, he was given a job as being the kind of a czar of road safety. Wasn't that true?
The Road Safety Authority, the RSA. Yeah,
He presumably was given a handsome salary to do that. What
presume
would
so.
this kind of thing not have been the most obvious thing to start with? The safety of the people who are trying to enforce the law. I would
Yeah.
have thought that was obvious. I would have thought something
But
like
sure,
Gay
here's
Byrne.
no, I know what really pisses me off big time about all this thing. I was up in Letterkenny about 4 or 5 days ago, and I was coming down about seven or half seven in the evening. And there was the cops with their hairdryer at a roundabout shooting fish in a barrel. It's the dual carriageway out of Letterkenny.
Hmm.
And I think they're in the space of maybe that's been there for about 40 years. I think there's been two fatalities, and they've got nothing or very little to do with speed or anything. And there was a couple of accidents, without. But hey, Jude, in other words, some superintendents send somebody out, hey, we need upgrading figures for speed. So go down there. Jude, people, in 40 years, I think there's been two accidents with fatalities, right? See in Donegal, there's fatalities all over the place, and there's country roads where there's guys doing 80 and 90 kilometers an hour, where 40 would be far too fast, but they're doing it maybe 11 or 12 o'clock at night. That seems to me that the cops, play fast and loose with, we'll get our figures up so some guy in Dublin, the commissioners, will be happy. Oh, I see there's a percentage increase in speeding detections in Donegal. That's meaningless,
Yeah.
absolutely meaningless. If you do it, and like some of these speed vans, they say, oh, we plant them where there have been fatalities. Absolute bollocks, dude. They're planting them where they think they can get easy speeding fines.
Hmm. Isn't that, it's just sort of desperate. It's like kind of using the fact that people have died there. as a sort of
Yeah.
a platform in which to, but as you say, increase their figures and make them look respectable. I
Yeah.
don't know. I think there's so many things about this that are so obvious, but there are two things I would say about it is one, there should be any cops stopping people for speeding or anything else. They should be doing it from a position of safety, not in the middle of
Yeah.
the road. And the second thing is, why the hell do people who make motorbikes or people who make cars design them in such a way they can go at about at least 100 miles an hour? You know, what is the point in that? What is it? Do you want to go to
Yeah.
something there, Pat? Are you okay?
No, no, no. Somebody just went past and beeped the horn there. It's a
Okay.
friend who's just leaving the house.
Okay. It wasn't a warning then. Anyway, those two things, I think, I just don't understand why the governments allow or why the people who produce these cars design them to break the law. That's what they're designed to
Yeah.
do. If they go over 70
Yeah.
miles an hour, they're designed to break the law. And everybody says it doesn't
But
say a
I
thing.
remember there was talk some time ago about putting limiters on cars and bikes and all,
Of
and
course.
then there was a sort of lobby against it. Said because if you're passing someone out there, and suddenly your speed was limited, and that the chances of fatality were quite high. So I don't know, Jude. I'm not an expert in road safety, but I do think it's a terrible tragedy. Some young yard out doing his duty died, maybe because of some sort of procedure. Jude, I presume, like you're saying, he must have been somewhere in the middle of the road, maybe trying to stop somebody. And like, dude, that's not the way to do it if you end up dead.
And the other thing, of course, as I say, is that the people who make these cars, uh, they're almost inviting people to break the law.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, if that
But
happened,
there's cars now, some of the electric cars, dude, I never understood this or never
geez, can they go
they,
from
they, they,
not to 60
they,
in about
they,
three
they,
seconds?
they say you're ahead of me. Exactly. There's the power in some of those electric cars apparently is
Oh, it's
unbelievable.
amazing. It's amazing and terrifying as well. Anyway, okay,
Yeah.
well, I think we've thrashed that one a good bit. I want to talk to you briefly, Pat, because we were watching last night. Should have watched it earlier, maybe. Conclave. Have you seen that movie on Netflix? Conclave.
No, I must go and watch it. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I was tempted to tell you what my thoughts on it were, but related to that was I read an article by Patsy McGarry, who's either
Irish
was or
Times.
is the Irish Times'
No, he was. He's retired now, as far as I know.
yeah, aye. Well, he gave this is before the Pope Leo was elected. He gave his list of runners and riders who were the people
Yeah.
that would be likely, and I ran through them, and they were Pietro Parolin of Italy, Cardinal Luis Tagle of the Philippines, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi of Italy, Cardinal Mario Urek of Malta, Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana, and finally Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo Basungu from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And neither of them, not one of his runners
Amazing.
riders show. I began to think, is this the case with, we talked about people having developing contempt for experts. I just have, like, Patsy McGarry must be steeped in, the workings of the Vatican over the years. You
Yeah.
say he's retired now. How come he didn't get even near to? Uh,
But there's a woman on. She works for one of those big religious. She's a commentator and all the rest of it. And she came on one morning. She says, "Look, it's like shooting, in the dark." She says, Everybody can say these are the people we think," but she says the last time Pope Francis, nobody saw him. He was so far. Like you remember when Fine Avon won the Grand National. Everybody on the front of him, fell at Beecher's Brook, and because he was so far behind, he was able to jump clear. Well, that was like Francis, they haven't a clue. And that's why they claim it's the Holy
Leo, you
Spirit
mean? That's
because
Leo.
they're
Is it Leo you mean?
Leo was the Holy Spirit because they say like nobody knows, and like I think in fairness, Patrick McGarry, I heard him on one day and he says, "Look, nobody has a notion," but he says here on the surface are the favourites. But
Uh,
dude, Francis was nowhere near in the running when in fact, they were going, "Who the hell is this guy?"
yeah. Well,
What was it? John, Pope Paul, Pope Paul II, John Paul II. Apparently, he was nearly locked out. He arrived late, and for the conclave, And apparently, had he arrived a minute later, the doors would have been locked, so he wouldn't have even been voted. So he was the last man in, and he was elected pope.
Maybe he did it
First
to
in,
have it.
first out.
Maybe he did it as he wanted to have a
To make an
dramatic
entrance.
entrance. Remember, people know I am here, baby. I am
I
here.
am here. Look at
But
me. I'm Polish.
I always, I don't know. I read a book when I was a young fella called The Cardinal, and
So did I.
so a lot of people of our generation did, or at least yeah, we're not really the
Yeah.
same generation, but you know what I'm saying.
Near
Uh,
enough.
it was a good book, American book, and it wound up actually, as far as I remember it. Now, no spoiler alert going to be given here. I think the central character, an American priest, ends up being not just a cardinal, but was he elected pope as well?
No, I don't think so. No, Jude,
No,
no.
he
But I
just
think
went.
did he not ruin it for the church in Eastern Europe and Russia? He gave someone away or someone. I can't remember now.
I can't
But hey,
remember
no,
that.
Jude, no. Remember there was a great film. Morris West wrote it, The Shoes of the Fisherman, and
Oh
Anthony
yes,
Quinn
yeah.
starred in the film. It was a lovely film. It really was. But is that it was about a sort? I think it was about a Polish pope or someone, a complete outsider
Yeah.
becomes pope.
Uh-huh.
So it's a rare thing. But Jude, I think the whole idea is nobody knows, Jude. I think when what's the many cardinals was 172 or something. When they get into a
133, I
room,
think. Yeah.
so I can never remember.
Yeah.
But when they get into a room, God knows, Jude, it's like ping pong. It goes all over the place.
Well, this is the thing you see. I think there's hunger in all of us because it's so totally secret. And because
Yeah.
they only communicate through smoke, which actually is only a
Yeah.
relatively recent thing, you know. That's only been going since the
Mhm.
beginning of the 20th century. But
Yeah.
it all adds to the sort of, I don't know,
Hey,
the
as we
drama of it
said on
all.
Friday, the pomp and the ceremony of it all
Aye.
is it's unbelievable. By
But
the way, changing the subject to digress, slightly before we come on there, I hear there's a big deal between China and the Americans in regard to tariffs. There's a 90-day pause, and I think all tariffs are being reduced. No, I'm not 100% certain as to, but it's something like 10%. And by the way, this is definitely the Americans were the ones who were far more anxious to do a deal with the Chinese than the Chinese were the Americans. Of that, there is no doubt. No, all this drum banging that the world is all rushing to make deals with.
hmm,
As we said in Freddie, and we didn't discuss it very much, due to, apparently, from what I can gather, this deal between the UK and was rushed through to give Trump some sort of a one to make it look good. And it's apparently a load of bollocks. It doesn't change anything very much.
that's right. It's an empty vessel, I think. But you see, Starmer needed to have what appeared to win, and Trump also needed to have what appeared to be a win.
Yeah,
But they say, I was listening to, I think it was a podcast. The point the guy made was Trump's method of negotiating is to make some outrageous demand. And as people are reeling back from that, then they let them stew for a while and then they come back to them again and say, okay, well, we'll just do this. So instead of putting 150% on you, we're just going to put 10%. And people are
yeah.
saying, oh, geez, that's so good. Oh, great. Whereas if he hadn't made the outrageous claim in the first place, if he said he's going to put 10% on everything, you say, oh, God, that's going to ruin my business. So I have a feeling that that's how he operates. And I hope to God China can, well, I'd be amazed if they wouldn't be able to see through it, that he would say he's going to do, what was it, 150% or something on everything from China. And then
Yeah,
you have negotiations and you say, well, no, we'll settle for 10. I have a feeling that the Chinese
Jude,
are,
I think you're giving him way too much credit there, because he seemed to have totally pissed off Canada,
yeah.
Mexico. Jude, apparently, we'll have to accept it. Apparently, despite all the tariffs, Chinese exports went up by something like 8% in the
Mm,
first 3 months because they found alternative markets.
mm.
Jude, and the other thing as well, apparently the Chinese, there was an American guy on yesterday, and he's saying. Uh, it's so stupid. He says the Chinese are now buying Australian beef and mutton, and they're buying they're buying their soya beans from Brazil. They're now totally bypassing America. They're finding alternative sources for their food.
That's interesting. Now, the question is, if Trump comes to a deal with China, will they revert to the original line of supply, or will they continue to explore their present markets, these new markets they've found.
But Judah, as we mentioned as well, Xi Jinping, the what do you call it, the Chinese president, was in Russia last week for the VED celebrations.
Yeah, yeah.
Judah, it seemed there's sort of a global realignment going on, and Trump has so alienated the old allies that and I noticed Starmer was walking with the EU leaders the last day. He wasn't walking with the Americans.
Aye.
He's saying that the EU is where it's at.
Well, you get the feeling somehow, don't you? I mean, about 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was no question that the US was the big power, the big
Yeah.
empire that had soft power or hard power throughout the world. Remember
Mm.
JFK's famous speech, like, no burden so heavy that they wouldn't be prepared to
Yeah, yeah,
bear it, and
yeah.
so on. I think that's not the case anymore. That you have countries like China and you have countries like, ironically, Vietnam and others,
Mm.
India, Brazil, who, between them, I think they're going to do a shift. And as Britain has found, I think America will find there are limits to their ability to stay at the top of the tree with everybody else beneath them, as
Yeah.
serfs, really. I like to
Yeah.
think that people will, because of the shock of what he's done, that it'll not work to his favor. It'll work, in fact, against his interest.
By the way, Jude, you just mentioned there, uh, Trump and his foreign secretary were trying, Marco Rubio, were claiming that they had been instrumental in getting the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, and they were claiming credit for it. The Indian foreign minister issued a statement saying they were not involved at all. It was a deal done between the two states themselves. The Americans are trying, Trump's trying to claim that he's this great peacemaker and so on, so on, so on. And I don't know, Jude. Like, remember he was going to solve the Ukraine-Russia conflict on day one.
Uh,
Well, he's been on more than 100 days, and there's still no sign of it.
yeah.
And his behaviour as regards to Israel and Gaza, no sign of that either.
Well, it's sort of natural. I would agree with you that he's trying to claim stuff he isn't responsible for. But I think that's it's been a long time since Stephen Roach won whatever
Tour
they
de
call
France,
Tour de France.
Tour de
And
France.
Charlie Howe
Uh,
rushed to be by his side. It's just in the nature of politicians to want to claim things. Very often claim things that they damn all to do with. Okay, Pat. We're running short of time here. We're down to nearly 3 minutes, but I want to talk briefly about this occupied territories bill. Um, Now, this occupied territories bill has not come into law.
no,
In 2018, now that's 7 years ago.
years
And the
ago, yeah.
occupied territories we're talking about here are the West Bank and perhaps Gaza
That
as well.
guy,
Certainly the West Bank in the Middle East. And Senator Frances Black I remember talking to her, and she said she was really disappointed that they hadn't got it passed, that she'd worked really hard at it. Here we are 7 years later, and it's still not passed. And we have
yeah,
Simon Harris yesterday, I think it was, saying that he signed a letter with six other foreign ministers expressing concern about Israel's latest plans to intensify its assault on Gaza. The words fail me. It's like saying that I expressed concern when I heard that 22 people were shot dead by the British Army on Bloody
uh,
Sunday. I'm expressing
I
concern.
concern.
What the
I
hell are
concern.
they
Not,
doing?
not, not. By the way, concern, not condemnation. Not saying we're going to do something. We express. But by the way, Jude, Rodrigo Gorman, the head of the
Uh,
Green Party,
Greens?
he was in government, and he said they got legal advice from the Attorney General. Uh, Harris and Martin are trying to claim there's a problem with
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
services
yeah,
part
yeah,
of this
yeah.
crap, and so on. Rodrigo Gorman said they got legal advice when he was in government, and there was no problem. And he's saying it's a stalling tactic and so on. They know what they are. They're scared shitless of annoying the Americans and the Israelis. That's what that's about, Jude. And everybody, and Frances Black said they've got numerous legal advice on this, and there's no real impediment. But Harris is now trying to say that okay, there's a pathway to stop the goods thing, but there's problem with the services.
services.
Now,
Yeah.
Jude, I think that's absolute bollocks.
It's more than bollocks, Pat. I think it's shameful. It really does
Uh,
shame Irish people. 7 years. I mean, Francis Black saw the need for it in 2018. This
yeah,
was well before the
yeah,
invasion of Israel by Hamas, well before it.
yeah.
Here we are 7 years later, and they're saying, "Oh God, well, it might not be legal," and so on. What nonsense! Are the Irish people or
But
the people
Judy,
of the
but
South
here's the
not able?
dishonesty. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil during the election said it was going to pass, and they know it's a big thing for the people of Ireland, and so on. They made all sorts of promises, and the minute they get into power, they start, this sort of stalling tactic. And they also lied flat out about the housing things. So, maybe people should ask themselves more questions in future about promises and all this
Right.
stuff when it comes to elections.
Okay, we're nearly out of time. But while yeah, I know you think about housing, and housing's a horrible issue for many people, very personal. But what we're talking about here is genocide.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Irish
So,
government hasn't got the cojones to pass a bill
yeah.
condemning them or to outlaw trade or services with Israel.
The last Pope
Quick,
condemned
quick,
what's
Pat,
happening
we're
in
really out of
Israel.
time now.
This one, UN, everybody isn't an outlier when it comes to condemning what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Pat, on that happy note, gray skies coming down on us. Let's hope
And it's
things
raining
will,
here.
things will look up. Okay.
All the
Bye.
best, dude.